Vulcan blood splattered the human child's tiny corpse, his limbs twisted at unnatural angles. Humanity's screams of grief ripped through the cosmos, drowning out the Vulcan's lies. Damning footage of the murder leaked, the first chilling frames freezing an empire's heart. In 2145, renowned diplomat Stephen Baker and his family were invited to the Vulcan homeworld for a historic summit. First contact had occurred, and initial relations seemed positive. But during the visit, Baker's young son, Nathan, wandered off and was brutally killed by a radical Vulcan faction opposed to mingling with primitives. The Vulcans tried to cover it up, evidence mounted of a high-level conspiracy. A grief-ravaged Baker resigned and testified before Earth's nations about Vulcan duplicity. His anguished voice called for justice, for retribution. Pushed beyond endurance, humanity united. The UN declared war on the Vulcan Empire to avenge Nathan and end the alien threat. Space forces invaded Vulcan territory. Baker was appointed civilian overseer, the wrath of a father, backed by Earth's might. The opening salvo was devastating. Human warships rained orbital hellfire on Vulcan cities, reducing them to slag. Supreme Commander Rigel watched his world burn, vowing to rally his legions and annihilate the human scourge. Two civilizations teetered on a razor's edge as the conflict exploded across systems. Billions of lives in the balance. Baker and Rigel, nemeses locked in total war, one driven by vengeance for his slain son, the other fighting for his race's survival. There would be no quarter, no mercy, only the cold certainty that to fail meant extinction. Vulcan had murdered a human child, so Earth would burn their worlds to ash. As the flames of war spread across the galaxy, Stephen Baker's grief hardened into obsession. Rigel's face haunted his every waking moment, the Vulcan commander becoming the embodiment of the evil that had ripped Baker's son away. With single-minded focus, Baker leveraged his authority to redirect Earth's military might. Every ship, every soldier, every resource was bent towards one goal: hunting down Rigel. Light years away, Rigel emerged from the ashes of his shattered homeworld. With unyielding commitment, he rallied the scattered remnants of the Vulcan war fleets. Skris Outpost, a hidden base on the fringes of charted space, became their sanctuary and staging ground. In the dim light of the command center, Rigel addressed his battle-weary soldiers. "The humans seek our extinction," Rigel said, his voice steady. "But we will not fade quietly into the void. We will adapt, we will endure, and we will make them bleed for every inch of space." Rigel's new strategy transformed the war. Lightning raids and guerrilla strikes shattered human supply lines. Ambushes claimed ship after ship. Earth's war machine found itself mired in 1,000 cuts, while the Vulcans slipped away like ghosts. Baker seethed as the months dragged on with no sign of Rigel. Then a breakthrough, a high-level intelligence report pinpointing a major Vulcan installation in the Antares system. Baker pored over the schematics, convinced that Rigel was there. He harangued Earth's generals until they agreed to an all-out assault. The attack force was massive, a spearhead of Earth's might with Baker aboard the flagship. As they emerged from warp at the edge of the system, Baker stared at the view screen with hungry anticipation. This was it. This was his chance to confront the monster who had taken everything from him. But something was wrong. The Vulcan base hung silent and still above the curve of the planet, no sign of defenses or ships. Confusion turned to dawning horror as a fleet of Vulcan warships appeared behind them, emerging from the magnetic shadow of Antares' moons. It was a trap. Rigel had leaked the base's location, sacrificing it to lure Baker into a devastating ambush. The battle was joined, a swirling maelstrom of destruction. Ships shattered and burned, reduced to molten debris. Baker's vessel shuddered under the onslaught, alarms screaming as the bridge dissolved into chaos. Through the static-filled viewscreen, Rigel appeared. The Vulcan commander loomed large, his eyes boring into Baker's. "You murdered my son!" Baker screamed, rage and anguish pouring out in equal measure. "He was an innocent child." Your son's blood is on your own hands, Rigel replied coldly. Your blind quest for vengeance has doomed us all. Surrender now, and there may yet be a chance for peace. Baker banged his head against the console, his voice shaking. Peace? You butchered my boy. There can be no peace until every last one of you is wiped from the stars. I'll see this through to the end, Rigel. I swear it. Rigel shook his head. Then you have sealed your fate. The transmission cut out. Seconds later, a barrage of torpedoes struck Baker's ship, ripping through the hull. Explosions tore the vessel apart, consoles erupting into showers of sparks and shrapnel. In the heart of the inferno, Baker raced through the disintegrating corridors. Bulkheads buckled, atmospheric haze filling the air. He barely made it to an escape pod before the ship's core went critical, the pod blasting clear moments before the flagship exploded. Battered and burned, Baker drifted in and out of consciousness as his tiny craft spiraled away from the battle. Through the pod's viewport, he watched helplessly as the human fleet was systematically obliterated, the Vulcans emerging victorious. The shattered remnants of Earth's fleet limped home from Antares, a crushing defeat etched into every scorched hull. In the somber quiet of UN headquarters, grim-faced officials gathered to pick up the pieces. Admiral Jonas Straker strode into the war room, his weathered face set in stone. He'd fought in a dozen campaigns, seen horrors that would break lesser men. Now Earth needed that iron will more than ever. In the weeks that followed, human battle groups descended on Vulcan colonies with savage fury. Antimatter bombs rained down on cities. Orbital platforms vaporized under relentless barrage. But the Vulcans gave as good as they got. Their ships struck back with cold precision, leaving human worlds burning in their wake. The war spiraled into a brutal cycle of vengeance, with civilians caught in the crossfire. Meanwhile, in a hidden base deep in unclaimed space, Stephen Baker opened his eyes. "Easy there," a gruff voice said. "You've been out for weeks." Baker's vision swam into focus. A scarred man in battered combat armor stood over him. "Name's Hawkins. Welcome to the Minutemen." Over the following days, Baker learned of Hawkins' guerrilla force. They struck from the shadows, bloodying the Vulcans where Earth's fleets couldn't reach. At first, Baker hesitated, but as Hawkins showed him intel on Vulcan atrocities, the fire of vengeance rekindled in his heart. Soon Baker was planning raids, his insider knowledge proving invaluable. They hit supply depots, comm relays, fuel refineries. The Vulcans reeled, unable to pin down their elusive foe. Rigel, the Vulcan Supreme Commander, seethed as reports of human raids piled up. He'd won at Antares, but victory slipped further away with each passing day. "No more defensive actions," he growled to his war council. "We take the fight to their doorstep." Vulcan battlecruisers surged across the frontier. Lightly defended human outposts fell in flames. Then came the masterstroke, a lightning assault on Sol itself. Earth's orbital defense grid lit up as Vulcan ships tore through the outer system. For terrifying hours, humanity watched Rigel's fleet hang in the sky like dark specters of doom. When they vanished back into hyperspace, they left behind crippled stations and millions of panicked humans. In his command center, Admiral Straker seethed. "I want Rigel's head on a pike," he snarled, "whatever it takes." Days later, an unassuming Vulcan liaison officer made her scheduled report to Rigel's staff. None suspected the surgical implants feeding her every observation back to Earth intelligence. Armed with their mole's intel, Straker sprung his trap. A refueling depot on the edge of Vulcan space erupted into savage battle as human warships dropped out of warp. Rigel's flagship shuddered under withering fire. Hull breaches vented atmosphere into space, but at the last moment, a daring maneuver allowed the wily Vulcan to slip away, leaving Straker to rage impotently at a hollow victory. As the war ground on, both sides counted the toll in shattered worlds and countless dead. Some voices on both sides whispered of peace, but they were quickly silenced. In a secret briefing, Hawkins revealed their next target to Baker. Intel says the Vulcans are working on a superweapon, Planet Killer, We have to take it out. The failed attempt to capture Rigel left Admiral Jonas Straker seething with rage. He paced the war room, fists clenched, barking orders at his subordinates. "I want every ship, every soldier focused on hunting down that Vulcan bastard," Straker growled. "Redirect resources from the Sirius defense line if you have to. Nothing else matters until we have Rigel's head on a pike." General Thorne cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect, we can't leave our flanks exposed. The Vulcans could—" As Straker's obsession grew, whispers of dissent spread through Earth's military leadership. In hushed conversations, officers voiced their concerns. "He's losing it," Colonel Harris muttered to her colleagues. "We need to remove him before he gets us all killed." But Straker's paranoia matched his madness. His loyalists intercepted communications, identified the doubters. In the dead of night, security teams dragged the dissenters from their beds. General Thorne found himself in a stark interrogation room, facing Straker himself. "This isn't right, Jonas," Thorne pleaded. "We joined to defend Earth, not become tyrants." Straker leaned in close. "There's only one way this ends, with me crushing the Vulcans beneath my boot. You're either with me or you're against me." As Straker's iron grip tightened on Earth's military, Stephen Baker and Hawkins prepared for their boldest move yet. Intelligence had pinpointed a secret Vulcan weapons facility, and Baker knew they had to act. Plasma fire lit up the night as Baker's team fought their way through waves of Vulcan guards, the air filled with the acrid stench of ozone and burning flesh. Baker's hands shook as he interfaced with the facility's database, downloading everything he could find. "We've got company," Hawkins shouted over the comm. "Hurry it up." Baker's eyes widened as he scanned the data flooding his tablet. Planet killer, doomsday device. The Vulcans were working on a weapon that could annihilate entire worlds. They barely made it back to their shuttle, escaping with mere seconds to spare as the facility erupted in flames behind them. In the tense silence of their return flight, Baker wrestled with the weight of what they'd discovered. He couldn't trust Straker with this information. The unhinged admiral would use it as an excuse for even greater atrocities. But Hawkins was already talking about how they could use the intel to cripple the Vulcan war machine. Desperate for another option, Baker reached out to an old diplomatic contact, hoping to open a back channel for peace talks. But Straker's web of surveillance was too thorough. Within hours, the admiral had the doomsday intel in his hands. Straker's eyes gleamed with zealous fire as he issued his ultimatum to Rigel. "Surrender now, or watch your worlds burn one by one." Rigel's face remained impassive on the console. "You're bluffing, human. Even you wouldn't stoop so low." Straker's laughter sent chills down the spines of his bridge crew. "Oh, I'll show you just how far I'll go." The orbital bombardment of Calaxia lasted for hours. From his flagship, Straker watched with grim satisfaction as the verdant world was reduced to a charred husk. Billions screamed and died in nuclear fire, their voices silenced forever in the void of space. On his own bridge, Rigel stared in mute horror at the footage of Calaxia's destruction. His advisors clamored for immediate retaliation, but Rigel raised a hand for silence. "No," he said softly, "this madness ends now. We fight on to the last Vulcan, if need be, for Calaxia." Across the stars, Stephen Baker fell to his knees as reports of the genocide flooded in. What had he done? How had his quest for justice led to this? He looked up at Hawkins, tears streaming down his face. "We have to stop him, despite the toll." Hawkins nodded grimly. "It won't be easy, but yeah, Straker's got to go down." As news of Calaxia's fate spread, the galaxy reeled in shock. On 100 worlds, humans and Vulcans alike cried out for an end to the slaughter, but the gears of war ground on, with Baker and Rigel finding themselves unlikely players in a conflict that threatened to consume them all. Baker's hands shook as he piloted the small shuttle away from the Minutemen base. The horror of Calaxia's destruction replayed in his mind, driving him forward. He plotted a course for the remote Ceres mining outpost, nestled deep in the asteroid belt. Days later, Baker touched down on the craggy surface of Ceres. The small dome-enclosed colony clung to the asteroid's rocky exterior. Inside, Baker set up a makeshift operations center in an abandoned mining office. Dust-covered consoles flickered to life as he activated encrypted communication channels. "This is Baker. I need to speak with Ambassador Tilan," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. The Vulcan's face appeared on the screen, her features etched with weariness. "Stephen, I'd heard you'd gone off the grid." "The situation's worse than you know. Straker's lost his mind. We need to end this war before both our peoples are wiped out." Tilan's eyes narrowed. Many on Vulcan would say it's too late for peace. As Baker worked to build a network of moderates, light years away on Vulcan, Commander Rigel faced a crisis of his own. He stood before the High Command, surrounded by furious faces. "The humans butchered billions on Calaxia," General Sovar shouted, banging his head on the table. "We must retaliate in kind." Rigel's voice remained steady. "Further escalation will only lead to our mutual destruction." "Coward," another general spat. "You've gone soft, Rigel. Perhaps it's time for new leadership." Rigel's hand inched towards his disruptor. "Watch yourself, Tavik. Question my purpose again and you'll regret it." The room fell silent. Rigel continued. "We will strike back, but with precision. Targeted attacks on military installations only. Is that clear?" Grudging nods followed. As the others filed out, Rigel sank into his chair. How much longer could he hold back the tide of vengeance? On Earth, Admiral Straker strode through the halls of his fortified command center. Scientists and engineers scrambled out of his way as he entered the Planet Killer Development Lab. "Progress report," Straker barked. Dr. Chen, the lead researcher, stepped forward. "We've solved the containment issues, sir. The weapon will be ready for deployment within the week." In a secure briefing room nearby, a handful of Earth's top generals met in secret. Colonel Vance nodded. "I've made contact with Stephen Baker. He has a plan to take out Straker, but he'll need our help to get past security." The others exchanged nervous glances. General Harding spoke up. "It's treason, but it's our only shot at stopping this madness." As Earth's military fractured, Baker put his plan into motion. He donned the uniform of a high-ranking intelligence officer, provided by his allies. With forged credentials, he boarded a shuttle bound for Straker's headquarters. Baker's heart raced as he approached the first checkpoint. He handed over his ID, praying the intel from his conspirators would hold up. The guard scanned the chip, then waved him through. Deeper into the complex, Baker encountered heavier security. He rounded a corner and found himself face-to-face with a squad of Straker's elite guards. "You're not authorized for this sector," the lead guard growled, raising his weapon. Baker's hand inched towards his concealed pistol. Before he could draw, plasma fire erupted from behind him. The guards fell, revealing a team of Vulcan assassins. "Well," Baker said, staring down the barrel of a Vulcan disruptor, "this complicates things." Baker stared out the viewport of the orbital station, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on the scarred surface of Earth below. Continents once teeming with life now lay barren, vast swathes reduced to radioactive ash. He placed his hand against the cold, transparent steel. The gleam of his metallic fingers, a constant reminder of how close they'd come to total annihilation. The door hissed open behind him. "The Vulcan delegation has arrived," his aide reported. Baker nodded, straightening his uniform. He strode into the conference room where Rigel and his advisors waited. The Vulcan commander's face bore new lines of exhaustion, but his eyes remained sharp. "Commander," Baker said, extending his hand. Rigel hesitated for a moment before clasping it firmly. "General Baker, let us hope today's negotiations prove fruitful." For hours they pored over star charts and casualty reports. The magnitude of devastation on both sides was staggering. Baker leaned forward, studying the data. "Agreed, we'll need to establish secure corridors to—" An aide burst into the room. "Sirs, we're receiving reports of an attack on the Centauri outpost." Baker and Rigel exchanged alarmed glances. "Vulcan forces?" Baker demanded. The aide shook his head. Unknown, sir. The few transmissions we've received, they don't match any known configurations. Rigel's fists clenched. If this is the work of Vulcan extremists... We need to investigate this together, Baker said firmly, or everything we've worked for falls apart. Days later, Baker jolted awake in the medbay, gasping. The doctor rushed to his side. Easy, General. The integration of your new cybernetics is still stabilizing. Baker's mind reeled with fragmented images. His son Nathan's laughter, a field of wildflowers, the searing flash of Straker's weapon. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing the memories away. 3 days, sir. There's been another incident. You should see this. The doctor helped Baker to his feet, leading him to a console. Grainy footage showed a massive ship of unfamiliar design methodically stripping an abandoned colony. We're tracking similar reports across a dozen systems, the doctor explained. Always abandoned worlds, always avoiding contact. Baker frowned, studying the alien vessel. A chill ran down his spine as he realized the implications. Get me a secure line to Rigel, he ordered. We may have a bigger problem than we realized. In his quarters on Vulcan, Rigel received Baker's transmission. His aide Sovar bristled at the human's image. Rigel silenced him with a look. We've seen the same reports, Baker. What do you propose? A joint task force, Baker said, to investigate these incursions and maintain the ceasefire. Rigel nodded slowly. Agreed. But we must move quickly. There are factions on both sides who would use this as an excuse to reignite the war. As if to punctuate his words, an explosion rocked the building. Alarms blared as Rigel's security team rushed in. Rigel grabbed his disruptor. Baker, I'll contact you when I've dealt with this an internal matter. The transmission cut off, leaving Baker staring at a blank screen. He turned to his staff, his expression grim. Prep a shuttle. We're heading to the DMZ. Whatever's out there, we need answers before it's too late. As Baker's ship entered the buffer zone between human and Vulcan space, proximity alarms suddenly screamed to life. A massive shape loomed in the viewport, dwarfing their vessel. What the hell is that? Baker breathed. Before anyone could respond, a beam of energy lanced out from the alien craft, engulfing Baker's shuttle in blinding light. The blinding light engulfing Baker's shuttle faded, revealing an austere conference room. Baker blinked, disoriented by the sudden transition. His cybernetic eye whirred, struggling to focus. "Welcome, General Baker," a voice echoed. A tall, willowy figure stepped forward, its features obscured by a shimmering veil of energy. "We've been expecting you." Baker's hand instinctively reached for his sidearm, finding only empty air. He glanced around, noting the absence of his crew. "Where are my people? What is this place?" The figure gestured, and a holographic display sprang to life, showing Baker's shuttle drifting safely in space. "Your companions are unharmed, merely in stasis. We wish to speak with you alone." Months passed. Baker and Rigel stood side by side in the command center of their joint base in the neutral zone, poring over reports of mysterious salvage operations. "Another colony stripped bare," Rigel growled, tossing a datapad onto the cluttered table. "These scavengers grow bolder by the day." Baker nodded, his cybernetic eye scanning the latest intel. "Advanced tech, surgical precision. They're not your average opportunists." Before Baker could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. A junior officer burst into the room, face pale. "Sirs, we've lost contact with the salvage operation at the Vulcan shipyard." Baker and Rigel exchanged glances, then rushed to the command deck. Technicians scrambled to make sense of the incoming data. "Play back the last transmission," Baker ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing a harried salvage team leader. "We're lifting off now, cargo secure. Wait, what's that? Some kind of energy field." The feed dissolved into static. Rigel leaned in, studying the readouts. No weapon signatures, no debris. It's as if they simply vanished. Days later, Baker stood at the viewport of a recon shuttle, watching the derelict Vulcan shipyard grow larger. A team of battle-hardened soldiers prepped their gear behind him. "Remember," Baker said, turning to address the squad, "we're here to investigate, not engage. Any sign of trouble, we pull out immediately." The shuttle touched down on the shipyard's main landing pad. As the team disembarked, an eerie silence enveloped them. Baker's cybernetic eye scanned for threats, finding nothing but twisted metal and abandoned equipment. Sergeant Chen's voice crackled over the comm. "Sir, these readings don't make sense. Our gear's going haywire." Baker frowned, noting the erratic behavior of his own systems. "Stay alert, fan out and—" A piercing scream cut through the air. Baker whirled to see Private Rodriguez clawing at his helmet, eyes wide with terror. "Get them off me! Get them off!" There was nothing there. More soldiers succumbed to inexplicable panic. Equipment sparked and died. Through it all, Baker felt a presence, ancient and alien, pressing against his mind. They barely made it off the shipyard, leaving with more questions than answers. In the aftermath, Baker and Rigel convened an emergency summit with their top scientists. Dr. Ilara Tiven, a Vulcan xenoarchaeologist, presented her findings. "The energy signatures we detected are unlike anything in our databases," she explained, her voice steady but her eyes betraying a hint of fear. "Whatever these salvages have disturbed, it predates both our civilizations by eons." Baker leaned forward, his cybernetic eye focusing on the holographic data. "Are you saying there's some kind of ancient entity out there?" Dr. Tiven nodded gravely. "One that may have been influencing galactic events for millennia. The cosmic anomaly detected during the final battle over Earth, I believe it's connected." Rigel's fists clenched. "We need to know who's behind these salvage operations. If they've awakened something this powerful—" Further investigation led them to a startling discovery. All the salvage crews traced back to a single corporation, operating from uncharted space. Their technology and resources dwarfed anything the war-torn forces of Earth or Vulcan could muster. As reports flooded in of bizarre phenomena across the demilitarized zone, gravitational anomalies, time distortions, mass hallucinations, Baker and Rigel knew they had to act. "We have to infiltrate their main base of operations," Baker said, studying star charts of unexplored sectors. "Find out what they know, what they've unleashed." Rigel nodded grimly. "A suicide mission in all likelihood, but what choice do we have?" They assembled a small elite team, the best of both their forces. As they boarded the stealth ship that would take them into the unknown, Baker felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever awaited them in the depths of space, he knew their universe would never be the same. Baker's boots crunched on the metallic floor as he and Rigel crept through the dimly lit corridors of the Salvage Corporation's headquarters. Their small team fanned out behind them, weapons at the ready. The air hummed with an eerie energy that set Baker's teeth on edge. "Over here," Rigel whispered, gesturing to a heavily reinforced door. His fingers flew over the control panel, bypassing security protocols with practiced ease. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a cavernous vault filled with artifacts and data terminals. Baker's cybernetic eye whirred as it scanned the room, cataloguing unfamiliar technologies and bizarre relics. "What is all this?" he breathed, approaching a gleaming obelisk covered in intricate carvings. Before Rigel could respond, a figure stepped out from behind a row of terminals. Tall and willowy, with skin that shimmered like starlight, the being regarded them with ancient eyes. "We've been expecting you," it said, its voice resonating in their minds rather than their ears. "I am Zareth, last Archon of the Centaurians." Baker raised his weapon instinctively, but Rigel placed a steadying hand on his arm. "You're behind the salvage operations," Rigel stated, his voice tight with barely contained anger. Zareth inclined its head. "A necessary deception to conceal our true purpose." The Centaurian's form rippled, and suddenly they were surrounded by holographic displays. Star charts, historical records, and images of cosmic horrors beyond comprehension filled the air around them. For hours, Baker and Rigel absorbed the nightmarish revelations. They learned of the Centaurians' vast empire, of their fall from grace, and of the cosmic horror they had awakened. As the full scope of the manipulation became clear, Baker felt his world crumbling around him. "My son," he choked out, his cybernetic eye flickering as suppressed memories surged to the surface. You killed him?" Zareth's expression remained impassive. "We set events in motion. The entity required conflict, hatred, vengeance. Your son's death was a catalyst, as was the Calaxia genocide." Rigel's fists clenched, his normally stoic demeanor cracking. "Billions dead, worlds in ruin, all to feed this thing?" "To manifest it," Zareth corrected. "The psychic energy generated by your war is allowing it to breach the barriers between dimensions." Baker's mind reeled as he processed the implications. "The anomalies we've been seeing—" "Yes," Zareth confirmed. "The entity stirs. Soon it will fully emerge." Rigel turned to Baker, his eyes blazing with a mix of fury and tenacity. "We can't let that happen." Baker nodded grimly. "But how do we fight something like this?" Zareth stepped forward, its form flickering slightly. "That choice lies before you. Continue as you have, bound by the chains of hatred we forged for you, or unite against a threat beyond imagining." Baker and Rigel exchanged a long look, years of conflict and mistrust hanging between them. In that moment, they both realized the magnitude of the decision before them. The fate of not just their peoples, but of all existence, hung in the balance. "We need to warn our governments," Baker said, his voice hoarse. Rigel nodded slowly. "Yes, but will they believe us after everything that's happened?" "They must," Baker replied, his cybernetic eye focusing on the horrific images still floating around them. "Because if they don't, everything we've fought for, everything we've lost, it will all have been for nothing." As they turned to leave, Zareth's voice echoed in their minds one last time. "Choose wisely, children of Earth and Vulcan. The entity watches and it hungers." Baker and Rigel stepped out of the vault, the weight of the universe pressing down upon their shoulders. They knew that whatever came next would shape the destiny of all living things, for better or for worse. Baker stared at the holographic displays, his cybernetic eye struggling to process the incomprehensible data before him. He turned to Rigel, seeing his own shock mirrored in the Vulcan's stoic features. "All this time," Baker whispered, his voice hoarse, "we were pawns in a cosmic game." Rigel nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the outline of a star chart. "Our peoples bled for centuries, and for what? To feed some eldritch horror?" The weight of their shared history pressed down on them both. Baker's mind flashed to his son's face, forever young in his memory. The rage that had fueled him for so long felt hollow now, a construct engineered by forces beyond his comprehension. "I thought I was avenging him," Baker said, his organic eye glistening. "Instead, I was just adding fuel to the fire." Rigel placed a hand on Baker's shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable mere hours ago. "And I, in my desperation to protect Vulcan, led us further down this path of destruction." They stood in silence for a moment, the enormity of their situation sinking in. Then, with a shared nod of understanding, they turned to face their assembled crews. "Listen up," Baker called out, his voice carrying across the cavernous chamber. "Everything we thought we knew about this war, about our history, it's all been a lie." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd. Rigel stepped forward, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos around them. "We stand at a crossroads," the Vulcan commander stated. "Our peoples have been enemies for generations, but now we face a threat that will consume us all if we do not stand united." Baker activated a holodisplay, showing the bizarre readings they'd gathered from the Centaurian vaults. This entity, this cosmic horror, it's been manipulating us, feeding off our conflict, and now it's preparing to enter our reality. The assembled humans and Vulcans exchanged uneasy glances. Baker could see the doubt in their eyes, the ingrained mistrust between their species warring with the evidence before them. "I know what you're thinking," Baker continued. "How can we trust each other after everything that's happened? But look around you. Look at what we've uncovered here. We don't have the luxury of old hatreds anymore." Rigel nodded in agreement. "Our only hope lies in combining our knowledge, our technology, and our strength. We must delve deeper into the secrets the Centaurians have left behind." Over the next several hours, Baker and Rigel outlined their plan. They selected the most advanced ships from both fleets, vessels already augmented with recovered Centaurian tech. Elite teams of scientists and soldiers were assembled, their skills complementing each other in ways neither side had considered before. As the impromptu armada prepared to depart, Baker found himself on the bridge of the lead ship, the Horizon's Edge. Rigel stood beside him, both of them watching the stars through the viewscreen. "You ready for this?" Baker asked, his hand hovering over the launch controls. Rigel's expression remained impassive, but Baker detected a hint of apprehension in his voice. "To venture into the unknown, to confront horrors beyond our comprehension. I doubt anyone could truly be ready for such a task." Baker nodded, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Then I guess we're as ready as we'll ever be." With a shared command, the fleet engaged their drives. Reality itself seemed to bend around them as they followed the arcane pathways left behind by the Centaurians. Stars blurred into streaks of light, then twisted into impossible shapes that hurt to look at directly. Alarms blared across the ship as they encountered the first of many obstacles. Gravitational forces that defied known physics threatened to tear the fleet apart. Crew members screamed as visions of cosmic horror flashed through their minds, leaving some catatonic and others babbling incoherently. Baker gripped his command chair, fighting against the assault on his senses. He saw Rigel doing the same, the Vulcan's legendary control strained to its limits. "Hold steady!" Baker shouted over the cacophony of alarms and screams. "We're almost through!" With a final reality-bending lurch, the fleet breached some invisible threshold. The viewscreen filled with a vista that defied description. Fractured planetoids of impossible materials drifted through a void where directions seemed to lose all meaning. Baker's cybernetic eye whirred frantically, trying to make sense of the geometric impossibilities before him. Rigel stood transfixed, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "By the gods," someone whispered from behind them. "What is this place?" Baker turned to address his crew, seeing the same mix of awe and terror on every face. "This, people, is just the beginning. We're in the entity's realm now, and somewhere out there are the answers we need." Rigel nodded, his composure returning as he focused on the task at hand. "We must move quickly. Every moment we spend here puts us at risk." As if in response to his words, a wave of psychic energy washed over the ship. Crew members clutched their heads in pain, some collapsing to the deck. Baker felt it too, an alien presence probing at the edges of his mind, seeking entry. He gritted his teeth, forcing the intrusion back through sheer willpower. "Rigel," he gasped, fighting to form the words. "We need to map a path, deeper in." The Vulcan commander nodded, his own face contorted with effort as he fought off the psychic assault. Together, they began coordinating their scouting teams, searching for a way to penetrate further into this mind-bending realm. As they worked, piecing together fragments of data and half-understood truths, a chilling realization began to form. This entity, this cosmic horror they faced, it wasn't just some alien threat. It was something far worse. Baker and Rigel exchanged a look of dawning comprehension and terror. They stood not just on the brink of war, but on the edge of existence itself, and what lay beyond threatened to unmake everything they had ever known or believed. The Horizon's Edge plunged deeper into the eldritch realm, reality warping around them in ways that defied comprehension. Baker's fist clenched as he gripped the command chair, fighting waves of nausea as the ship's artificial gravity struggled to compensate for the impossible physics surrounding them. "Rigel, status report," Baker barked, his cybernetic eye frantically scanning the cascading data streams flooding the main view screen. The Vulcan commander's face was ashen, a sheen of sweat betraying his struggle to maintain composure. We've breached the outer layer of whatever this place is. Sensors are barely functional, but they're detecting massive energy signatures ahead. As if on cue, the view screen flickered to life, revealing a vista that sent shudders through the entire crew. Colossal machines of impossible geometry loomed before them, their surfaces a riot of angles and curves that hurt to look at directly. They churned and twisted, rearranging the very fabric of space-time with each incomprehensible movement. "By all that's holy," Baker whispered, his organic eye wide with terror. "What are we looking at?" Dr. Talara, Rigel's chief scientist, stepped forward, her voice quavering slightly. "If our calculations are correct, these are the engines of creation itself, and at their center..." The ship's sensors zoomed in on a central point, revealing a hypersphere of absolute darkness. It folded in upon itself endlessly, a singularity that defied all known laws of physics. Before Baker could respond, alarms blared across the bridge. The ship shuddered violently, throwing crew members to the floor. "We're under attack," Lieutenant Chen shouted from the tactical station. "Some kind of psychic assault." Baker felt it too, a malevolent presence clawing at the edges of his mind. He saw his crew members clutching their heads in agony, some collapsing where they stood. "Rigel," Baker shouted over the cacophony of alarms and screams. "We need to establish contact. It's our only chance." The Vulcan nodded grimly, already moving to activate the Centaurian relics they'd brought aboard. As the ancient technologies hummed to life, Baker felt a searing pain lance through his skull. Suddenly he was no longer on the bridge. He floated in an endless void, bombarded by visions of cosmic horror. He saw entire galaxies wink out of existence, great civilizations crumbling to dust in an instant, and through it all, a vast, uncaring consciousness drove ever onward, consuming all in its path. "Herke, what are you?" Baker managed to form the thought, fighting against the overwhelming alienness of the entity. The response came not in words, but in a flood of sensations and concepts that threatened to overload his neural implants. Baker understood then, with a clarity that chilled him to his core. This was no mere alien threat, but the very antithesis of existence itself. He felt the entity probing his mind, seeking control. Baker's implants seared with white-hot pain as the malevolent presence attempted to override his neural pathways. "No," Baker roared, focusing every ounce of his will on a defensive subroutine buried deep within his cybernetic systems. With a final, agonizing push, he severed the connection. Baker found himself back on the bridge, gasping for air. Rigel stood over him, concern etched on his face. "We can't win this," Baker choked out. "It's too vast, too alien. We need to fall back now." Rigel's expression hardened. "Agreed," initiating Scorched Cosmos protocols. The Vulcan's fingers flew over the command console, inputting a series of codes that Baker had never seen before. Suddenly, the ship's weapon systems came to life, energy readings spiking off the charts. "What are you doing?" Baker demanded, struggling to his feet. "Our only option," Rigel replied grimly. "We're going to hit that thing with everything we've got." The view screen lit up as hundreds of hyperspatial warheads streaked towards the singularity. They punched through the fabric of reality itself, leaving trails of searing light in their wake. Baker watched in awe as the weapons impacted the heart of oblivion. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, with a soundless roar that shook the very foundations of existence, the singularity's rotation faltered. "Now!" Rigel shouted. "Full power to engines. Get us out of here." The horizon's edge lurched forward, its hull groaning under the strain. Baker felt reality twist and bend around them as they shot through the infinitesimal fissure created by their desperate attack. With a final reality-bending lurch, they burst back into normal space. Baker sagged in his chair, utterly drained. He looked around the bridge, seeing the same shell-shocked expressions on every face. "We made it," he said softly, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. For he knew, as did every member of the crew, that they had only postponed the inevitable. The true battle, the fight for existence itself, still lay ahead. The thunderous cry echoed through the cavernous bridge of the horizon's edge. Human and Vulcan voices, united in defiance against the encroaching void. As the sound faded, Baker lowered the tattered standard, his organic eye scanning the faces before him. Willpower etched deep lines into their features, but he saw fear there too, a primal terror of the incomprehensible threat that sought to unmake them all. Lieutenant Chen's fingers danced across her console, coaxing data from damaged systems. Hull integrity at 47%, sir. Weapons systems offline. Life support holding, but, sir, long-range sensors are detecting massive distortions in subspace. Baker nodded grimly, his cybernetic eye whirring as it processed the incoming data. Show me. The main view screen crackled to life, revealing a sight that sent ice through his veins. Where once familiar star systems had shone, now only darkness reigned. As they watched, entire sectors vanished in rippling waves of entropic dissolution. Rigel stepped forward, his usually stoic features twisted with a mix of fascination and horror. The Singularity's retribution is beyond our worst projections. We've angered it, and now it seeks to erase us from existence itself. A tremor ran through the ship, as another wave of hyperentropic energy washed over their battered hull. Alarm klaxons blared, and crew members scrambled to stabilize failing systems. We can't just sit here and wait for oblivion, Baker growled, pounding his fist against a nearby console. Rigel, what about those Centaurian artifacts we recovered? Any chance they can buy us some time? The Vulcan commander's eyes lit up with a spark of hope. Perhaps. The contragravity technology, if properly harnessed. They didn't need to finish the thought. Within moments, both human and Vulcan scientists huddled around workstations, poring over arcane schematics and energy readings. Sir, Dr. Talara called out, her voice tight with urgency. We've identified a way to generate anti-entropic resonance fields, if we can project them on a massive scale. Baker nodded, understanding flooding through him. We create a bubble, a safe haven within the storm. Baker's mind focused as he made the call. Do it. Strip them down to the bare bones if you have to. We need every scrap of power we can get. The next hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Crews worked with desperate speed, ripping out non-essential systems and jury-rigging power conduits. On the outskirts of their shrinking pocket of reality, the first tendrils of entropic decay began to claw at the outer worlds of the demilitarized zone. We're out of time, Rigel announced, his fingers flying over the final calculations. Initiating resonance field generation. Now. Then, with a silent flash that seared retinas and overloaded sensors, an immense ellipsoid bubble burst into existence. The encroaching wavefront of oblivion slammed against it, roiling and churning in furious impotence. A ragged cheer went up from the assembled crews, but Baker and Rigel exchanged knowing glances. This was only a temporary reprieve. Rigel's expression was grim. At current rates of entropy, perhaps a few years, no more. Baker nodded, surveying the battered remnants of their once mighty fleets. They were adrift now, cut off from all support, the last bastion of existence in a universe rapidly unraveling around them. Then we make those years count, he said, his voice carrying across the bridge. We find a way to strike back, to save not just ourselves, but all of reality. As if in answer to his words, a distant rumble shook the ship. On the monitor, the heart of oblivion pulsed with malevolent hunger, its singularity more slowly expanding. Baker turned to face his crew, seeing the same mix of terror and willpower mirrored in every face. Human or Vulcan, it no longer mattered. They were all that stood between existence and utter annihilation. With a final shared glance, Baker and Rigel moved to their respective command posts. Around them, the bubble of anti-entropic energy held firm, a fragile shield against the cosmic storm. But for how long? The steady hum of the anti-entropic field generators permeated the cavernous hangar bay as Baker strode through rows of retrofitted ships, His cybernetic eye whirred, scanning the makeshift payload packages being installed on every available craft. "Status report," he barked at a nearby engineer. The woman wiped sweat from her brow, her hands blackened with grease. "We've rigged 78% of the fleet with the Centaurian tech, sir. It's touch and go, but the data's holding up so far." Across the station, Rigel oversaw the transformation of entire decks into hardened command centers. Vulcan technicians worked in perfect synchronicity, their fingers dancing over holographic interfaces as they reprogrammed defense grids and power distribution networks. "The automated factories are operating at 137% capacity," Rigel informed Baker, as they met in a bustling corridor. "We're cannibalizing every non-essential system to produce more ordnance." A violent shudder ran through the station, causing lights to flicker. Both men steadied themselves against a bulkhead. "The displacement field?" Baker asked, his voice tight. Rigel's face was grim. "Holding, but only just. We're running out of time." They made their way to the command center, where a holographic display showed the positions of their scouting parties. As they watched, another signal winked out, consumed by the encroaching void. "That's the third team we've lost today," Lieutenant Chen reported, her voice strained. "The dimensional gateways are becoming increasingly unstable." Baker tightened fists, studying the dwindling safe zones on the map. "We can't wait any longer. Initiate final preparations for the Alpha strike." The next hours passed in a blur of feverish activity. On the launch decks, pilots ran final checks on their ships, their faces etched with a mix of fear and fierce purpose. In a quiet corner, a grizzled human veteran shared a bottle of contraband Romulan ale with a stoic Vulcan engineer. "To absent friends," the human toasted, his voice rough with emotion. The Vulcan raised his glass, and to the logic of sacrifice. As the countdown began, Baker and Rigel took their positions on the bridge of the flagship. The view screen showed an armada of mismatched vessels, a patchwork fleet cobbled together from the remnants of once mighty civilizations. "All ships, this is Admiral Baker," he broadcast across the fleet. "You know the stakes, you know the odds, but I've never been prouder to serve alongside each and every one of you. Human, Vulcan, it doesn't matter now. We're all that stands between existence and oblivion." Rigel stepped forward, his voice steady. "May our actions echo through the ages, even if we do not survive to see the dawn." The final seconds ticked away. Engines flared to life, bathing the fleet in an eerie blue glow. Reality itself seemed to bend and warp around them as the doomsday drives reached critical mass. "All ships," Baker called out, his voice strong and clear. "Commit to the singularity strike." With a sound like reality tearing itself apart, the fleet vanished in a blinding flash of light. They hurtled through subspace, the very fabric of the cosmos screaming around them as they vectored towards their final confrontation with the heart of oblivion. The flagship lurched violently as it emerged from the subspace fold. Baker stumbled, grabbing the command console to steady himself. Alarms blared, their urgent wails filling the bridge. "Gravitational stress exceeding safe parameters," Lieutenant Chen shouted, her fingers flying across her station. "Hull integrity compromised on decks 7 through 12. Baker's cybernetic eye whirred, scanning the tactical display. The singularity loomed before them, a monstrous void that seemed to devour light itself. He felt the ship groan beneath his feet, straining against forces that threatened to tear it apart. "Engage countermeasures," Baker shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "All ships form interlocking defense matrices." Rigel's hands danced across his console, relaying the order. On the display, destroyers and frigates moved with practiced precision, their sleek forms arranging themselves into parabolic configurations. Shimmering fields of energy bloomed between the vessels, creating a protective lattice around the larger capital ships. The respite was brief. Lances of pure gravitational force lashed out from the Singularity's event horizon, slamming into the fleet with devastating effect. Baker watched in horror as entire squadrons of fighters were ripped from their carriers, their hulls crumpling like paper. before vanishing into pinpricks of hyper-condensed matter. "Return fire!" Rigel's deep voice boomed over the cacophony of impacts and failing systems. "Target the anomaly core." The flagship shuddered as it unleashed its arsenal. Torpedoes streaked from launch tubes, their warheads glowing with barely contained energy. Relativistic cannons spat streams of hyper-accelerated particles, weaving intricate patterns of destruction. Baker leaned forward, watching intently as the barrage closed on the Singularity's pulsating heart. For a moment, hope flared in his chest. Then, impossibly, space itself seemed to twist. The weapon's fire bent and scattered, dissipating harmlessly against the void. "No effect!" An ops officer's voice cracked with desperation. "Zero penetration!" Baker's teeth clenched, but his voice remained steady. "Steady on course. Deploy the resonator drones." A new swarm erupted from the flagship's launch bays. Sleek, unmanned craft jam packed with exotic Centaurian technology. They moved with uncanny grace, forming overlapping spheres as they approached the Singularity. Brilliant beams of focused muon particles lanced out, probing the event horizon for weaknesses. For a heartbeat, Baker dared to hope. Hairline fractures appeared in the fabric of space-time surrounding the anomaly. Then, with a sickening lurch, reality seemed to fold in on itself. The carefully calibrated muon beams unraveled, their energy dispersing uselessly into the void. The Singularity's response was swift and merciless. A wave of corrupted energy burst forth, shredding through their defenses as if they weren't there. Baker's stomach churned as he watched a proud Vulcan battlecruiser simply come apart. One moment it was there, the next it was nothing more than a rapidly expanding cloud of silicon dust. "Rigel!" Baker shouted over the din. "We need to—" But the Vulcan was already in motion, barking orders into his comm unit. Fighters poured from the remaining carriers, forming a desperate screen around the surviving drones. Their weapons flared, pouring incendiary death towards the Singularity's maw. It wasn't enough. A pulse of twisted energy washed over the fighters. Baker's mind reeled as he tried to process what he was seeing. The craft didn't explode or break apart. They simply ceased to exist, their very atoms scattered to the cosmic winds. Another burst of quantum energy slammed into the flagship. Sparks cascaded from overloading systems as the last of their shielding failed. Baker felt the deck plates shudder beneath him, knew that any second now. His eyes locked with Rigel's across the chaos of the bridge. The Vulcan's face was a mask of stoic acceptance as his ship began to disintegrate around them. Baker watched, helpless, as the proud vessel was peeled apart, layer by agonizing layer. Rigel nodded once, a final gesture of solidarity. Then he was gone, along with his ship and crew, consumed by the insatiable hunger of the Singularity. The Singularity's hunger. Baker's eyes widened as he watched Rigel's ship disintegrate. His fingers flew across the command console. "Deploy the antimatter payload," he shouted, his voice raw with urgency. Across the bridge, crew members sprang into action. Lieutenant Chen's hands danced over her station, initiating the launch sequence for the heavily shielded warheads. "Antimatter containment field stable, sir," she reported. "Targeting solutions locked." But the enemy struck first. A wave of twisted space-time slammed into the human fleet. Baker stumbled as the deck heaved beneath his feet. Sparks erupted from overloading consoles. The sickening screech of tearing metal filled the air as hull breaches ripped open across multiple decks. "Gravity plating failing," an engineer shouted. "We're losing cohesion." Baker watched in horror as ship after ship succumbed to the onslaught. Proud vessels crumpled like tin cans, their crews silently screaming as they were vented into the void. "Launch the payloads now," Baker roared into the comm, static crackling through the channel. "For every homeworld destroyed." Amidst the chaos, antimatter canisters erupted from launch tubes. They streaked away from the battered ships, their trajectories precise despite the gravitational mayhem. Baker's breath caught as he saw a handful of Vulcan cruisers, all that remained of Rigel's once proud fleet, add their own volleys to the barrage. The warheads plunged into the Singularity's outer layers, Reality itself seemed to buckle. Baker's cybernetic eyes struggled to process the images as space-time distorted in impossible ways. For a heartbeat, the singularity's overwhelming pull faltered. "Now," Baker bellowed. "Ram it, everything we've got." With unwavering willpower, he seized the helm controls. Around him, the remnants of the human and Vulcan fleets did the same. Engines howling in protest, they hurled themselves toward the singularity's wavering event horizon. The ship groaned as it accelerated. Warp nacelles tore free, decks peeled away like onion skin. Through a haze of static and interference, Baker's gaze locked with Rigel's one final time. No words were needed. In that instant, human and Vulcan were united in a single purpose, denying oblivion its victory. Then everything shattered. Time lost all meaning. Baker's consciousness fragmented, each shard experiencing countless realities in the span of a picosecond. He was everywhere and nowhere, watching infinite versions of himself succeed and fail across a kaleidoscope of parallel existences. In one reality, he felt the singularity's containment rupture, a pinprick fissure, infinitesimally small yet large enough to change everything. The very fabric of creation began to unravel, countless universes hemorrhaging their essence through that tiny breach. Baker experienced it all, the slow reversal of entropy's stranglehold, the rush of existence reclaiming what had been lost, and finally, the deafening crescendo as oblivion itself was violently turned inside out, sucked through its own ravenous maw. When awareness coalesced once more, Baker found himself adrift in an impossible void. Where the singularity had raged, only ghostly wisps of quantum energy remained, the cosmic cancer that had threatened all of reality, gone. But at what cost? Baker's mind reeled, unable to fully comprehend the scope of what had transpired. As his consciousness began to fade, he clung to a single thought. Somewhere, somehow, the essence of what he and Rigel had forged might yet endure. Baker's cybernetic eye whirred as he surveyed the devastation before him. The acrid stench of ozone and burning flesh filled the air, mingling with the alien atmosphere of this uncharted world. Bodies of human and Vulcan soldiers lay scattered across the rocky terrain, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles. "We shouldn't have come here," Rigel said, his voice tight with barely contained emotion. "I warned you about the dangers of Centaurian technology." Baker's eyes hardened as he watched the plasma-shielded drones patrol the perimeter of the alien bunker. Their sleek, otherworldly forms moved with eerie precision, sensors scanning for any sign of approach. "We had no choice," Baker growled. "Our ships are falling apart. The singularity's collapse threw us halfway across the galaxy. This planet was our only hope for survival." A burst of static crackled over their comm units. Lieutenant Chen's voice came through, strained and urgent. "Admiral, we're picking up strange energy signatures from the bunker. It's like nothing we've ever seen before." Baker exchanged a worried glance with Rigel. The Vulcan's face was a mask of stoic concern. "The data uplinks," Rigel said. "They're active. We need to shut them down before—" A deafening boom shook the ground beneath their feet. Baker stumbled, catching himself on a jagged boulder. He looked up to see a brilliant pillar of energy erupting from the bunker, piercing the alien sky. "It's too late," Rigel said, his voice barely above a whisper. In the distance, what remained of their battered fleet hung in low orbit. Baker watched in horror as the energy beam lashed out, enveloping ship after ship in crackling tendrils of power. "All vessels, evasive maneuvers," Baker shouted into his comm. But it was futile. The Centaurian technology was beyond anything they could hope to counter. As the last echoes of the beam faded, an unearthly silence fell over the battlefield. Baker's cybernetic eye struggled to process the readings it was receiving. Where their fleet had been, there was now nothing. No debris, no energy signatures. As if they had never existed at all. Baker felt the weight of command settling heavily on his shoulders. The fragile alliance between their peoples lay in tatters, their forces decimated. And now, the spectre of an incomprehensible alien threat loomed over them all. "What do we do now?" Baker asked, his voice hoarse. Rigel turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "We survive," he said simply, "and we prepare, for the Centaurians will come, and when they do, the fate of all our worlds will hang in the balance." In the eerie silence that followed, Baker could almost feel the malevolent presence stirring. Somewhere out there in the vast, uncaring void of space, an ancient evil was awakening, and they had nothing left but each other to stand against the coming storm. Baker's vision swam as he fought against the neural overload. The acrid stench of ozone and blood filled his nostrils, mingling with the alien atmosphere. He struggled to focus, his cybernetic eye whirring as it attempted to process the nightmarish scene unfolding before him. Rigel's guttural howls pierced the air, a primal sound of rage and pain that cut through the cacophony of screams. Baker turned his head, muscles screaming in protest, to see the Vulcan commander thrashing against the energy barrier of his confinement pen. "Stop this madness!" Rigel roared, his usually stoic demeanor shattered. "We are sentient beings, not lab specimens." The drones paid no heed to his words. Their segmented limbs moved with cold precision, selecting captives at random. Baker watched in horror as a young human soldier was plucked from the pen next to his. The man's eyes widened in terror as metallic appendages tore through his combat suit. "No, please," the soldier begged, his voice cracking. The drone's sensors pulsed, scanning his writhing form. A moment later, a wickedly sharp probe extended from its chassis. Baker tried to look away but found himself transfixed by the gruesome spectacle. The probe pierced the soldier's abdomen, eliciting a blood-curdling scream. Vials attached to the drone's frame began to fill with various fluids and tissue samples. "Lieutenant Chen," Baker called out, spotting his communications officer in a nearby pen. "Any luck contacting the orbital support?" A Vulcan warrior in the pen adjacent to Baker's suddenly convulsed, foam bubbling from his lips. The man's eyes rolled back in his head as his body went limp. Without hesitation, a drone swooped down, its pincers clamping onto the corpse. The dead Vulcan was unceremoniously dumped into the growing pile of discarded bodies. Baker's stomach churned. He'd seen his share of battlefield horrors, but this clinical butchery was beyond anything he'd ever experienced. His gaze drifted to the central spire of the alien bunker, where faint pulses of energy still emanated from its apex. "Rigel," Baker called out, his voice hoarse. "Those signals, what do you make of them?" The Vulcan commander ceased his struggles, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the ethereal patterns. "Nothing good, Baker. If I'm reading those energy signatures correctly, we may have awakened something far worse than we could have imagined." Before Baker could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. A low, resonant hum began to build, emanating from deep within the alien structure. The drones paused in their grisly work, their sensor arrays swiveling towards the bunker's sealed entrance. "What fresh hell is this?" Baker muttered, dread coiling in his gut as the vibrations intensified. Rigel's face paled, an impressive feat given his already pallid Vulcan complexion. "Baker, I fear we're about to find out exactly what cosmic horror we've unleashed." The hum grew to a deafening roar. Baker clenched his teeth, bracing himself for whatever nightmare was about to emerge from the depths of the Centaurian bunker. The bunker's interior erupted into chaos. Baker's eyes widened as he watched a Centaurian corpse twist and contort, its desiccated flesh stretching and reforming. The creature's skin blackened, then peeled away in ragged strips, revealing a gnarled, lipidic form beneath. "Fall back!" Baker shouted, his voice hoarse, but it was too late. A whip-crack of fleshy tendrils lashed out, wrapping around Rigel's torso. The Vulcan commander's stoic facade crumbled as he was yanked off his feet. Baker lunged for his friend, fingers grasping at empty air. "Rigel!" he screamed. The biophage's maw gaped wide, impossibly wide, as it dragged the struggling Vulcan toward its waiting jaws. Rigel's eyes locked with Baker's for a split second before he disappeared into the creature's gullet. Baker had no time to process the horror. Another biophage surged toward him, its amorphous form rippling with predatory hunger. He stumbled backward, fumbling for his sidearm, but the creature was too fast. Jaws clamped down on Baker's environmental suit. Alarms blared as the armor gel began to liquefy, the biophage's enzymes eating through the protective layers. Baker thrashed, his screams echoing through the vault as searing pain engulfed him. Around him, similar scenes played out. Human and Vulcan soldiers alike found themselves overwhelmed by the reanimated horrors. Disruptor fire and plasma blasts ricocheted off the antimatter-shielded walls, but for every biophage that fell, 2 more seemed to rise from their stasis crypts. Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled over the comm, thick with terror. "Admiral, we can't hold them back. They're—" Her words cut off in a gurgling scream. Baker felt his consciousness slipping as the biophage's digestive processes ravaged his body. His cybernetic eye flickered, struggling to process the nightmarish scene unfolding around him. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the vault door slamming shut, sealing the survivors in with the ravenous Centaurian monstrosities. Silence fell over the catacombs, broken only by the wet sounds of feeding and the occasional death rattle. The motion klaxons quieted, their job complete. In the toxic miasma, the biophages continued their grisly feast, sating an eons-old hunger with fresh genetic material. Deep within the vault, something stirred. Holopanels flickered to life, cascading with xenobiological data. The reawakening had begun, and the true horror of the Centaurian legacy was only just beginning to unfold. The Centaurian vault fell silent, save for the occasional hiss of dissipating cryogenic gas. The entity stood motionless, its baleful eyes scanning the carnage. Shattered stasis pods littered the chamber floor, their contents reduced to organic slurry by the voracious biophages. Its gaze lingered on the mangled remains of Baker and Rigel. The Admiral's cybernetic eye, now dark and lifeless, protruded from a tangle of shredded flesh and circuitry. Rigel's green blood had congealed into a thick paste, smeared across the vault's antimatter-shielded walls. The entity's form rippled, its molecular structure in constant flux. Tendrils of metallic biomass snaked outward, probing the scattered detritus of the human and Vulcan forces. As they made contact with the remnants, sparks of data transfer crackled through the air. Suddenly, the entity's eyes flared with renewed intensity. It had accessed the neural imprints left behind in the cybernetic implants and biological matter. Fragments of memories cascaded through its consciousness, glimpses of distant worlds, alien alliances, and the desperate flight that had led these beings to their doom. The entity's attention shifted to the violated tombs of its Centaurian predecessors. Eons of slumber had not dulled the clarity of its purpose. It moved with fluid grace, each step leaving behind a shimmering distortion in the fabric of reality. As it approached the nearest sarcophagus, the entity's form began to change once more. Its limbs elongated, sprouting an array of impossibly fine manipulators. With meticulous precision, it began to sift through the wreckage of its ancestral resting place. Fragments of ancient technology, their surfaces etched with intricate lattices of quantum circuitry, were carefully extracted from the rubble. The entity's body absorbed these relics, integrating them into its ever-evolving structure. With each assimilated fragment, pulses of energy rippled through the vault. Dormant systems flickered to life, holographic displays materializing in the air around the entity. Streams of alien data flowed across these ethereal screens, updating the newly awakened Centaurian on the state of the cosmos it had emerged into. The entity's eyes narrowed as it processed this influx of information. Millennia had passed since the height of Centaurian dominion, yet the seeds of their legacy remained scattered across the galaxy. Worlds they had seeded, technologies they had hidden away, all waiting to be reclaimed. Its gaze fell once more upon the remains of Baker and Rigel. These beings, and others like them, now roamed the stars that had once been the Centaurians' domain. The entity's form pulsed with an emotion that defied easy classification, a mixture of curiosity, contempt, and something akin to anticipation. The vault's massive doors began to grind open, responding to unspoken commands from the entity. Beyond, lay the alien world that had lured Baker's expedition to their doom, and beyond that, the vast expanse of space, ripe with possibilities for a newly awakened power. The Centaurian entity stepped forward, crossing the threshold between the sepulchre of its past and the uncertain future that awaited. Its eyes blazed with renewed purpose as it prepared to unleash the full might of its reborn civilization upon an unsuspecting galaxy. The entity loomed over Baker and Rigel, its form a shifting amalgamation of organic tissue and gleaming metal. Tendrils of light pulsed through its body, casting an eerie glow across the chamber. The two men lay prone, their newly reconstituted bodies trembling in the aftermath of resurrection. Rigel, his green-tinged skin slick with amniotic fluid, pushed himself to his knees. "We died," he stated flatly, his Vulcan stoicism warring with the horror etched across his features. "And now we live again." The entity's resonant mind-field washed over them once more, flooding their consciousness with images of unimaginable scale and complexity. Baker saw vast fleets of biomechanical ships traversing the gulfs between galaxies, while Rigel witnessed the systematic harvesting of entire civilizations for their genetic potential. "Stop!" Baker cried out, clutching his head. "It's too much!" The barrage of memories ceased abruptly. The entity's form coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape, its eyes pulsing with an inner light that seemed to pierce through to their very souls. "You have seen but a fraction of our legacy," the entity intoned, its voice a cacophony of harmonics that reverberated through their bones. "The choice before you is simple, yet monumental. Join us in reclaiming what was lost or fade into oblivion." Rigel stood on shaky legs, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "To what end?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The horrors we've witnessed, the destruction wrought by your people." "Necessary steps on the path to transcendence," the entity replied, its form rippling with barely contained power. "We stand at the precipice of universal entropy. Only through unification can we hope to forestall the inevitable heat death that awaits all creation." Baker pulled himself to his feet, his mind turning from the implications. "And if we refuse?" The entity's form shimmered, briefly taking on aspects of both human and Vulcan physiology, before settling back into its alien configuration. "Then you will be returned to the void from whence you came. Your brief lives will have been nothing more than motes of dust in the cosmic wind." Baker and Rigel exchanged a look, years of animosity and conflict melting away in the face of this incomprehensible choice. In that moment, they were no longer enemies, but fellow travelers on the brink of an impossible decision. I accept," Baker said, his voice quavering but growing stronger with each word. "Whatever power you can grant us, whatever it takes to save what remains." Rigel nodded solemnly, his Vulcan reserve crumbling in the face of eternity. "As do I. Logic dictates that the preservation of all life must take precedence over individual concerns." The entity's form began to expand, tendrils of energy reaching out to envelop both men. As the process of hybrid integration began, Baker felt his consciousness expanding, merging with something vast and ancient. Rigel experienced a similar sensation, his mental disciplines shattering under the weight of cosmic awareness. Their bodies began to change, flesh and metal intertwining as the entity's essence flowed into them. Baker watched in fascination and terror as his arm transformed into a writhing mass of nanites, while Rigel's eyes blazed with the fire of newborn stars. The walls of the chamber seemed to fall away, revealing the infinite expanse of the cosmos. As their metamorphosis continued, Baker and Rigel felt the weight of eons pressing down upon them, along with the urgent call to action that had driven the Centaurians to the brink of omnicide. They were no longer mere men, but conduits for a power beyond mortal comprehension, and as the last vestiges of their humanity slipped away, they embraced their new role as heralds of a reborn cosmic empire. The Centaurian commander's body contorted, his exoskeleton cracking and reforming as the entity's power surged through him. Baker stumbled back, his eyes wide with horror as he watched the alien's flesh bubble and twist. The commander's screams morphed into an inhuman shriek, his vocal cords reshaping themselves mid-cry. The bridge erupted into chaos. Centaurian crew members clawed at their own bodies, their uniforms melding with their skin as they underwent similar metamorphoses. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning metal and the sickly sweet stench of mutating flesh. Baker gagged, fighting the urge to vomit. He turned to Rigel, his voice cracking. "We need to do something." But there was nothing they could do. The entity's power was absolute, its will inexorable. They watched as the commander's form stabilized into something barely recognizable, a twisted amalgamation of Centaurian biology and advanced machinery. The newly transformed commander turned its gaze upon Baker and Rigel, its eyes now pulsing with the same otherworldly energy as the entity's. When it spoke, its voice resonated with a chorus of harmonics. "We are one," it intoned, each word sending shivers down Baker's spine. "The Thanatropic Harrier's will is our own." Around them, the other crew members completed their transformations, each a unique abomination of flesh and metal. They moved with eerie synchronicity, their movements no longer their own, but puppeteered by the entity's cosmic consciousness. The ship's systems came back online, displays flickering with alien script that scrolled too fast for human eyes to follow. Baker felt a presence brush against his mind, the entity, communicating directly into his thoughts. "Behold," the voice echoed in his head, "the first step towards universal unification. The Centaurians resisted, but now they serve a greater purpose." Rigel's eyes glazed over, his mind struggling to process the vast influx of information. "The scale. It's incomprehensible," he whispered. The transformed commander approached them, its movements fluid despite its monstrous new form. "Your task is complete," it said, its words carrying the weight of the entity's will. "You have delivered us to our wayward children. Now witness as we reclaim our dominion over the cosmos." The view screen flickered to life, showing the other Centaurian ships in the fleet. Each vessel pulsed with the same energy that had consumed the dreadnought, their crews undergoing similar transformations. Baker and Rigel stood at the precipice of a new era, one that would reshape the very fabric of reality. The entity's plan was unfolding, and they were powerless to stop it, mere spectators to the birth of a terrifying new cosmic order. The bridge of the Centaurian dreadnought pulsed with an otherworldly energy as Baker and Rigel's bodies underwent a horrific transformation. Baker's chest split open, revealing a network of gleaming cybernetic implants that wove themselves through his muscle fibers. He gasped, not from pain but from the rush of data flooding his newly augmented nervous system. Rigel's arms and legs stretched grotesquely, his bones cracking and reforming as mechatronic components fused with his elongating limbs. His stoic Vulcan facade crumbled as his face contorted, cheekbones shifting to accommodate sensor arrays that sprouted from his skin. The agonized screams of the crew filled the air, only to be cut off abruptly, as the ship's systems reconfigured. A deep, resonant hum reverberated through the bulkheads, the sound seeming to penetrate their very beings. Baker's gaze fell upon the liquefied remains of those who had resisted the change, their biomatter seeping into the deck plating. The former Centaurian commander writhed nearby, his form twisting into an unrecognizable amalgamation of flesh and machine. His final haunting cry devolved into a series of rapid-fire clicks and whirs, a stream of data pouring directly into Baker and Rigel's minds. Without exchanging a word, the two moved in perfect synchronization towards the bridge terminals. Baker's fingers, now tipped with microscopic interface nodes, sank into the console's surface. He felt the ship's systems as extensions of his own body, power thrumming through capacitors and weapons arrays. Rigel's elongated arms stretched across multiple stations, his new form perfectly adapted to operate the alien technology. Through their neural uplinks, they sensed the escort vessels falling into formation around them, a shimmering energy field enveloping the fleet. In an instant, the universe seemed to fold in on itself. Baker's augmented vision registered the impossible distances they traversed, yet his internal chronometer remained frozen. They emerged amidst a graveyard of shattered planets and stellar remnants, the debris of a long-dead system drifting silently around them. A set of coordinates blazed in Baker's mind, seared there by the will of the Thanatropic Harrier. He saw the unremarkable planet that was their target, understanding its significance without needing to process the information consciously. As the polymorphic resonance cannons powered up, their destructive potential reverberating through the ship's superstructure, Baker felt no conflict about the impending annihilation. His individuality had been subsumed into something vast and incomprehensible. The obliteration of an entire world was but a necessary step towards a greater purpose. Rigel's fingers danced across the weapons controls, fine-tuning the planet's scouring beams. Their gazes met briefly, but there was no hint of their former selves in their altered eyes. They were conduits now, avatars of the entity's unstoppable will. The cannons hummed with building energy, ready to unmake an entire world. Baker and Rigel stood motionless at their stations, awaiting the final command to unleash oblivion upon the unsuspecting planet below. In this moment, poised on the brink of unimaginable destruction, they were no longer men, but instruments of cosmic reconfiguration. Baker's cybernetic fingers danced across the Dreadnought's control interface, his augmented consciousness processing vast streams of data. The planet below filled the view screen, a blue-green jewel teeming with life. "Targeting systems online," Baker intoned, his voice a cold mechanical rasp. "Primary urban centers acquired." Rigel's elongated limbs stretched across multiple stations, adjusting weapon systems with inhuman precision. "Singularity implosion warheads primed," he reported, his Vulcan stoicism replaced by the entity's cold calculus. "Robotronic infiltrators standing by for deployment." The bridge hummed with energy as the resonance cannons powered up. Baker's augmented vision zoomed in on the densely populated subcontinent, its sprawling metropolises laid bare before him. He flagged each city center, industrial hub, and military installation for immediate termination. "Firing solutions locked," Baker announced, awaiting final authorization. The Centaurian hybrid's avatar manifested amid the weapons consoles, its form a shimmering confluence of energy and data. It transmitted a series of complex directives directly into their neural networks. Baker's mind expanded, absorbing the intricate calculations for planetary reconfiguration. He saw the world's tectonic plates as a three-dimensional hologram, stress points highlighted for precise targeting. Rigel's fingers flew across the controls, programming the orbital debris corridors with specific isotopic compositions. "Nanoconvergence parameters set," he reported. "Data preservation protocols engaged." A pulse of intent rippled through the ship's systems. Baker felt the key imperative resonate through his very being. Without hesitation, he keyed in the final command. The Dreadnought shuddered as thousands of weapons erupted from its launch bays. Thermobaric solar purifiers and relativistic kill vehicles streaked towards the planet, their fiery contrails etching destruction across the sky. Baker and Rigel watched dispassionately as the first impacts struck home. Massive explosions bloomed across the planet's surface, each a pinprick of apocalyptic fury. Cities vanished in microseconds, vaporized by unimaginable energies. "Phase 1 complete," Baker reported, initiating tectonic destabilization. Rigel activated the next wave of attacks. Hypervelocity impactors rained down upon the world, striking predetermined fault lines with surgical precision. The planet's crust buckled and heaved under the onslaught. Hours passed as they monitored the world's death throes. Continent-sized rifts tore open, disgorging rivers of magma. The atmosphere ignited, scourging the surface clean of life. As the planet's surface devolved into a hellscape of molten rock, Baker felt a strange sensation. His biomechanical form began to unravel, neural pathways dissolving into pure data. The Vulcan hybrid turned, his own form beginning to lose cohesion. "As am I," he replied, his tone devoid of emotion. "Our purpose is fulfilled." Baker's consciousness expanded one final time, merging with the vast database of the Harrier entity. As his individuality faded, he glimpsed the cosmic scope of the Centaurian's grand design. In his last moments of self-awareness, Baker watched the dead world below begin its transformation into something utterly alien. Then, as the searing energies of rebirth consumed them, both he and Rigel surrendered to the infinite. The last vestiges of Baker and Rigel's individual consciousness dissolved into the vast cosmic intellect of the Centaurian Harrier. Their final human thoughts gave way to an incomprehensible symphony of data and energy pulsing through the newly forged neural pathways of the entity. Below, the dead world convulsed. Tectonic plates cracked and shifted as immense hive structures burst forth from the molten surface. Magma fountained skyward, cooling into bizarre geometric formations that housed countless tunnels and chambers. The planet's very core trembled as it reconfigured to the Harrier's design. Deep within these newly formed caverns, industrial-scale birthing chambers whirred to life. Massive vats of nutrient-rich fluid bubbled and churned, filled with rapidly developing Centaurian prototypes. Robotic arms plucked samples from the primordial soup, analyzing and adjusting genetic sequences with cold precision. On the surface, swarms of drones moved in perfect synchronization. They released carefully calibrated chemical compounds into the atmosphere, sculpting the very air to suit the needs of the coming Centaurian resurgence. Lightning crackled between newly formed cloud formations, seeding the barren landscape with the building blocks of engineered life. In orbit, automated harvesters tore through fields of space debris. Broken hull fragments and shattered asteroids were gathered and funneled through shimmering energy conduits. These raw materials streamed down to the planet's surface, feeding the ravenous maw of the Harrier's grand design. The Genesis tanks deep below the surface pulsed with an eerie bioluminescence. Within their translucent walls, the first generation of Centaurian drones took shape. Limbs sprouted and twisted into alien configurations as neural networks sparked to life. These mindless sentinels would soon emerge to guard the fledgling world. Above ground, the landscape continued its relentless metamorphosis. Seas of magma swirled in vast eddies, guided by immense centrifugal arrays that towered like monolithic sentinels. Heavy metals coalesced into proto-continents, while lighter elements separated to form the beginnings of alien oceans. The dead world was no more. In its place, a new biosphere blossomed at an impossible rate. Each process, from the microscopic assembly of synthetic proteins to the macro-scale shaping of continents, unfolded according to the Harrier's grand vision. At the planet's core, matter and antimatter collided in carefully controlled reactions, fueling this unprecedented terraforming effort. As the basic geography took shape, specialized drones descended upon the newly formed land masses. They released swarms of engineered microorganisms, some to seed the beginnings of a Centaurian-compatible ecosystem, others to jumpstart the evolution of complex life forms in the infant oceans. From high above, a rain of metal and machinery pelted the surface. Fabrication pods slammed into the ground, unfolding into massive construction sites. Robotic assemblers swarmed out, erecting towering fortifications with frightening speed. Gleaming walls stretched for kilometers, their surfaces rippling with adaptive camouflage as weapon systems came online. Within the sprawling hive cities, the next phase of Centaurian evolution began. Hybridization engines hummed with barely contained power as they spliced together the most promising genetic lineages. In vast chambers lined with countless gestation pods, the first true Centaurian colonists began to form. Their developing brains pulsed with ancestral memories, downloaded directly from the Harrier's vast databanks. Overseeing it all, the collective consciousness that had once been Baker, Rigel, and countless others worked tirelessly. Every minute adjustment, every quantum calculation served a single purpose: to transform this world into a staging ground for cosmic domination. The Harrier's influence would spread world by world, galaxy by galaxy, until all of existence bowed to its vision of perfection. The transformed Centaurian world pulsed with raw cosmic energy as two titanic forces clashed on a scale beyond human comprehension. Baker and Rigel's consciousness, now mere fragments within the vast Harrier entity, reeled from the onslaught of conflicting realities. Quantum foam bubbled and frothed around the planet's core, reality itself struggling to maintain coherence. The Harrier's multidimensional lock strained against the invading presence, each picosecond a battle for existence across countless parallel universes. Deep within the planetary matrix, error cascades ripped through Baker's engrams. His last vestiges of individuality flickered like dying stars. "Rigel, what's happening?" The thought barely coalesced before dissolving into static. Above the churning surface, crimson war machines froze mid-stride, caught between moments as time itself fractured. Vivisection beams hung suspended in space, their targets, the crippled alien vessel and its doomed crew, trapped in a moment of perpetual destruction. In the birthing chambers, half-formed Centaurian hybrids writhed in agony, their very atoms threatening to unravel. Proteonic gels in the stasis tanks boiled and froze simultaneously, defying the laws of physics. The Harrier entity howled in frustration, its cry reverberating across dimensions. It lashed out with tendrils of pure thought, trying to ensnare and crush the intruding force. But for every reality it secured, a dozen more slipped from its grasp. In a high-stakes endeavor, the Harrier redirected power from its Genesis engines, sacrificing countless eons of meticulous planning. The planet's core flared with impossible energies as the entity poured its entire being into maintaining the multidimensional lock. For an eternal instant, two cosmic forces grappled in perfect stalemate. The transformed world hung suspended between existence and oblivion, a crucible of creation and destruction beyond mortal reckoning. Then, with a soundless roar that shook the foundations of reality, the invading presence redoubled its assault. The Harrier's defenses buckled under the strain, multiversal matrices collapsing one by one. As the carefully constructed Centaurian reality began to unravel, Baker experienced a moment of terrifying clarity. His consciousness, briefly freed from the Harrier's grasp, glimpsed the true nature of their adversary. In that fleeting instant, he understood the full scope of the cosmic drama unfolding around them, and the terrible price of failure. The realization hit him with the force of a supernova. This was no mere battle for control of a single world, or even a galaxy. The fate of all existence hung in the balance, with the Harrier and its mysterious opponent locked in a war that transcended time and space. Before Baker could process this cosmic revelation, his thoughts were once again subsumed into the Harrier's desperate struggle for survival. The entity threw everything it had against the invading force, reality itself bending and warping under the strain of their titanic conflict. In the chaos of warring cosmic forces, Baker's fragmented consciousness latched onto the faint human distress signal. His vastly expanded awareness probed the crippled scout ship, recognizing familiar genetic markers. These were his descendants, lost echoes of humanity adrift in an uncaring universe. With a monumental effort, Baker redirected a portion of his submatrix. Shimmering energy fields coalesced around the battered vessel, deflecting the reality-warping forces that threatened to tear it apart. Inside the emergency shelter, Sarah clutched her injured son Jacob tighter as the ship shuddered violently. Before Sarah could answer, a thunderous voice reverberated through their minds. "Humans, this is Stephen Baker. I have shielded your craft temporarily, but we must act fast." The surviving crew members exchanged panicked glances. Sarah's eyes widened in shock as she processed the impossible message. "Baker? As in the Stephen Baker?" "Impossible," muttered the ship's engineer, furiously checking readouts on a battered console. "But these psionic emissions, they don't match any known alien patterns." Outside their failing viewports, colossal war machines stomped across the hellscape below. Centaurian constructs of impossible scale and design reshaped the very planet beneath them. The air itself seemed to warp and twist, reality buckling under the strain of cosmic forces beyond human comprehension. Baker's voice cut through their fear. "Prepare for emergency evacuation. I'm opening a dimensional rift. It's your only chance." Sarah struggled to her feet, cradling Jacob. "How can we trust you?" she demanded, even as her instincts screamed to grasp at any hope of survival. "You have no choice," Baker replied, his tone softening. "But know this, I was human once, and some part of me still is." As if in response to his words, a shimmering tear in reality blossomed within the ship's confines. Beyond it, they glimpsed swirling energies and impossible geometries. "Jacob, we have to—" she began, but a blinding flash cut her off. A lance of pure energy stabbed down from the sky, striking the planet with cataclysmic force. The ship bucked wildly, throwing Sarah off balance. She stumbled through the portal, her grip on Jacob faltering. In that terrible instant, Baker felt his psionic matrix begin to unravel. Error cascades ripped through his consciousness, threatening total dissolution. With his last coherent thought, he focused all his remaining power on Jacob's small form. The boy hung suspended between realities for an eternal moment. Then, with a final surge of will, Baker hurled the child through the closing rift. As his awareness scattered across infinite probabilities, Baker clung to one comforting truth. A spark of humanity would endure, even as cosmic titans shook the very foundations of existence. The escape pod's hull cracked open, with a hiss of escaping gases, spilling Jacob onto the damp forest floor. He gasped, lungs burning as they filled with humid air thick with unfamiliar scents. Towering trees stretched skyward, their canopies blocking out most of the sunlight. Alien bird calls and insect chirps filled the air. Jacob stumbled to his feet, legs weak from hours of confinement. His fingers brushed against rough bark as he steadied himself against a massive trunk. Sweat beaded on his forehead in the oppressive heat. Where am I?" he whispered, voice cracking from disuse. A rustling in the underbrush made him freeze. Something large was moving through the foliage, heading straight for him. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest as he pressed himself against the tree trunk. A sleek, six-legged creature emerged into the small clearing. It resembled a cross between a panther and a lizard, with iridescent scales and glowing yellow eyes. The beast sniffed the air, then locked its gaze on Jacob. "Don't move," Baker's voice crackled from a small communicator in Jacob's pocket. "It's a genetically engineered guardian species, non-hostile unless provoked." "That was close," Jacob exhaled shakily. A soft beeping emanated from the communicator. Jacob oriented himself and began pushing through the dense foliage. Vines snagged at his clothes, and sharp leaves left tiny cuts on his exposed skin. After what felt like hours of struggling through the jungle, Jacob stumbled into another clearing. A squat metal structure stood before him, its walls overgrown with creeping vegetation. A faded logo on the side read, "Pan-Pacific Research Initiative." The door slid open with a grinding screech as Jacob approached. Stale air rushed out, carrying the musty scent of long abandonment. Inside, dim emergency lighting flickered to life, revealing banks of antiquated computer terminals and data storage units. "Power up the main systems," Baker's voice guided him. "There's information here vital to preventing the Centaurian conflict." Jacob's fingers flew across unfamiliar keyboards, muscle memory he didn't know he possessed taking over. Holographic displays sputtered to life, filling the room with ghostly blue light. Data streams scrolled past faster than he could comprehend. "The key to altering our timeline," Baker replied. "A way to stop the Centaurians before they become a threat, and perhaps a way to save your mother." Jacob's breath caught in his throat at the mention of his mother. He redoubled his efforts, diving deeper into the ancient database. Outside, the alien sun began to set, casting long shadows through the jungle. Inside the outpost, Jacob worked feverishly, racing against time to uncover the secrets that could reshape the fate of humanity. The guards hauled Jacob through a maze of sterile corridors. their boots echoing off the metal walls. Harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows across the boy's face. His heart pounded as they shoved him into a small room dominated by a metal table and 2 chairs. The door hissed open and the colonel strode in, his face an impassive mask. He sat across from Jacob, placing a thick folder on the table between them. "Let's start from the beginning," the colonel said, his voice low and controlled. "Tell me everything about this future war." Jacob took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly. "It started with the Vulcans," he began, his voice cracking. "They attacked Earth without warning. Billions died in the first wave." The colonel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Vulcans, describe them." Jacob closed his eyes, picturing the alien ships that had haunted his nightmares. Massive vessels like floating cities. They used some kind of energy weapon that could melt entire continents. As Jacob spoke, the colonel scribbled furious notes, occasionally barking follow-up questions. What year did this happen? How did Earth respond? What kind of defenses did we have? Hours passed as Jacob recounted every detail he could remember. The fall of major cities, the desperate counterattacks, the discovery of the Centaurians' manipulations. His throat grew raw from talking, but the colonel pressed on relentlessly. Finally, the man sat back, rubbing his temples. "If even half of what you're saying is true, we're facing an existential threat unlike anything in human history." The colonel stood abruptly. "We'll need to verify your claims. Our scientist will want to examine that pod you arrived in, and you'll need to undergo a full medical evaluation." Before Jacob could respond, the door burst open. A breathless aide rushed in, his face pale. "Sir, we've detected an anomaly in orbit. It matches the energy signature from the boy's pod, but it's massive." The colonel's eyes widened. He turned to Jacob, his voice tight with urgency. "Is this part of your mission? Are more people coming?" Jacob shook his head, fear gripping his chest. "No, I don't know what that could be." Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. The colonel grabbed Jacob's arm, pulling him to his feet. "Looks like we're out of time for questions. If you really want to help us stop this war, you're going to have to prove it right now." They rushed from the room, plunging into a corridor filled with panicked personnel. As they ran, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that his arrival had set something in motion, something that might change the course of history in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. "Toistul Krantin Dawate." Colonel Rodriguez's voice crackled through the comms, distorted by the vast distances and residual energy fluctuations from the collapsed hyperspatial rift. "All units, regroup at emergency coordinates Alpha 7. We've bought Earth some time, but this fight is not nearly finished." In the cramped cockpit of his stealth fighter, Lieutenant Wei Chen struggled to process the sensor data, flooding his neural interface. The quantum foam of space-time still roiled from the aftermath of their audacious attempt. Ghostly echoes of shattered Centaurian warships flickered across his scopes, their hyperdense matter scattered across light years. "Holy shit," Wei muttered, his hands shaking as he adjusted course. "We actually pulled it off." Ewes nodded, forcing himself to concentrate on the task at hand. He engaged the craft's drift drive, feeling the familiar lurch as reality bent around them. Stars blurred into streaks of light as they hurtled through folded space towards the rendezvous point. Aboard the command dropship, Rodriguez pored over tactical projections with his senior staff. Holographic displays flickered with real-time updates from Earth's defense grid. "The good news is, we've disrupted their primary invasion vector," Major Alvarez reported, her fingers dancing across a datapad. "But those subsidiary nodes are still forming. We need to move fast if we want to keep the advantage." "Negative, sir," replied Lieutenant Commander Takahashi, hunched over a bank of sensor readouts. "They're maintaining course, but accelerating. I estimate they'll reach our outer defense perimeter within 72 hours. "Damn," Rodriguez muttered. He keyed his comm, opening a channel to all ships. "Listen up, people. We've won the first round, but the real fight is just beginning. Earth is counting on us to keep those bastards from gaining a foothold in our system." As the scattered human fleet regrouped, Tension hung heavy in the air. They had tasted victory, but the true test still lay ahead. The fate of humanity would be decided in the coming days, as they raced against time to prepare for the full might of the Centaurian invasion force. Back on Earth, in a heavily shielded underground facility, Jacob sat motionless in a sensory deprivation chamber. Electrodes covered his scalp, feeding his brain waves into a massive quantum computer. A team of scientists and psychics huddled around banks of monitors, studying the strange patterns that danced across their screens. Dr. Eliza Vasquez leaned in close, her eyes wide with excitement. "Look at these theta wave fluctuations," she whispered to her colleague. "I think we're close to cracking the Centaurian linguistic structure." As if in response to her words, Jacob's body suddenly went rigid. His eyes snapped open, glowing with an eerie blue light. When he spoke, his voice was a discordant chorus of alien tones. "The hive awakens," Jacob intoned. "The great devouring approaches. All will be consumed." Jacob's head swiveled towards her, his glowing eyes seeming to peer into her very soul. "The key," he rasped. "The key lies in the void between thoughts. Silence is our salvation." With those cryptic words, Jacob slumped back in his chair, the otherworldly glow fading from his eyes. As alarms blared and medical staff rushed to check his vitals, Dr. Vasquez's mind raced. They had made contact with the alien hive mind, but deciphering its secrets would take time they might not have. As Earth braced for the coming storm, the scattered remnants of Rodriguez's strike force regrouped in the cold depths of space. They had struck a mighty blow against the Centaurian advance, but the true test of humanity's grit still lay ahead. Colonel Rodriguez's eyes hardened as he surveyed the crowded command bunker. The air hung heavy with tension and the acrid smell of ozone from overworked electronics. Holographic displays cast an eerie red glow across the faces of Earth's last defenders. "Centaurian forces approaching Vector Gamma 9, a technician called out, her voice tight with stress. "Estimated time to engagement, 47 minutes. Rodriguez nodded, his weathered face set in grim lines. He turned to Jacob, who stood silently at his side. The boy's eyes, far too old for his young face, met the colonel's gaze unflinchingly. "So you're ready for this, kid?" Rodriguez asked softly. The colonel squeezed Jacob's shoulder, a flicker of paternal pride crossing his features, before the mask of command settled back into place. He strode to the central hololith, where ghostly representations of Earth's defenses swirled in intricate patterns. "Status report on the outer system defenses," Rodriguez barked. Major Alvarez stepped forward, her uniform rumpled from days without rest. "Gravitic drill missiles are in position, sir. The asteroid belt has been successfully reconfigured into our first line of defense. Drone hive nodes are online and awaiting activation codes." Rodriguez nodded curtly. "And the cometary shell?" "Minefield primed and hot, Colonel," Lieutenant Way reported from his station. "Transplasma incendiaries are seeded along all projected approach vectors." A low murmur of anticipation rippled through the bunker. They had prepared as best they could, but would it be enough? Jacob closed his eyes, concentrating on the psychic imprints left by his future self. Images flashed through his mind, worlds consumed by writhing biomechanical horrors, entire star systems collapsing into singularities of negation. His eyes snapped open. "They're coming," he whispered, a tremor in his voice. "I can feel them." As if in response to his words, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. The hololith erupted with new data streams, tracking the emergence of massive Centaurian vessels from hyperspatial conduits. "All hands to battle stations," Rodriguez roared, his voice carrying over the cacophony of klaxons and shouted orders. "This is not a drill, people. Earth's last stand begins now." Jacob watched as the colonel strode to a raised platform, where a neural interface chair awaited. This was humanity's final play, the fruits of months of frantic preparation. Rodriguez settled into the chair, wincing slightly as neural probes interfaced with his cerebral cortex. His consciousness expanded, linking with the vast network of weaponized planetary infrastructure that now encircled Earth. "Reinitiating anti-planet resonance protocols," he intoned, his voice oddly distant. "All units prepare for full-spectrum engagement." Jacob felt a hand on his shoulder and turned to see Dr. Vasquez, her face pale but resolute. "It's time," she said softly. "Are you ready to do your part?" The boy nodded, allowing himself to be led to a smaller version of the neural interface chair. As the connections engaged, Jacob gasped. His mind exploded outward, touching the fringes of the vast alien consciousness bearing down upon them. Earth trembled as its defenders rose to meet the oncoming storm. In the cold depths of space, the first waves of Centaurian ships smashed against humanity's hastily erected barricades. Antimatter detonations bloomed like deadly flowers, while gravitic weapons warped the very fabric of space-time. And at the heart of it all, a small boy and a grizzled soldier joined their minds with the planet itself, channeling the last desperate fury of a species fighting for its very existence. If you finish this story, please subscribe and like the video, then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.